Welcome to the US Center. Our event will start soon. To adjust the sound on your headsets, use the volume rocker on the side near the power button. If you are curious about the full US Center schedule, please scan the QR code at the reception desk. Welcome to the US Center. Our event will start soon. If you are curious about the full US Center schedule, please scan the QR code at the reception desk. Welcome to the U.S. Center. Our event will start soon.
Okay. All right, headphones on. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you for putting up with the slight delay. We are delighted to be here today. My name is Nick Audiello. I am a senior advisor at the Investor Leadership Network, which is a group of 13 global institutional investors, asset owners, and asset managers who are working collectively to identify ways to build a more sustainable economy. One of the key priorities of the Investor Leadership Network, which will be the topic of discussion today, is how to mobilize more private capital towards closing the financing gaps in achieving the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm delighted to introduce our panel here today. And I think how we will get started, we're going to go down the row, and each panelist will have a few opening remarks, and then we're going to have a little bit of a conversation. So thank you for joining us, and I will pass right now to Lyda Fitz from the United States Treasury.
Thanks, Nick. Does that work? There we go. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to have been working with ILN the past few years, really focused on private capital mobilization into emerging markets. And I think from a government's perspective, from our Ministry of Finance perspective, because I'm from the Treasury, it's really our role to try and use our convening power to drive systemic change. And we've really been working on that through the MDBs, the largest source of climate finance. Secretary Yellen really has made that MDB evolution a major push of her administration, and she has brought the MDB heads along with like-minded partners together several times to drive towards clear targets of private capital mobilization. And we are also working with the G7 through Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment to set a collective goal of $200 billion, actually $600 billion towards emerging market infrastructure, and working with investors to try and move this across economic corridors where we really can bring projects together and feed off the leverage of private and public funds, as well as in the G20, where we at Treasury co-chair the Sustainable Finance Working Group along with the PBOC of China. And there we're really focused on how can we make climate finance more accessible and faster. So we've done a systemic review, and I really appreciate Brazil's leadership this year on the climate finance architecture. I think where we can use these convenings to drive an increase in the amount of data that's available to investors and an increase in the amount of tools that offer de-risking are two ways that we think that we can get to greater scale of private investment across climate in emerging infrastructure globally.
Thank you, Lyda. Eric Krypton from CDPQ.
Thank you, Nick. It's great to be here. So I'm going to focus my introductory remarks talking a little bit about blended finance. Because blended finance is one of the, I think, most important innovative mechanisms that we can use to mobilize private capital at scale towards our climate objectives. And I'm specifically going to refer to a project that we did at the Investor Leadership Network, where we did a deep dive analysis of what we identified as 13 of the best examples of blended finance globally. And we did that deep dive, and we uncovered 3 sets of key enablers that allowed them to be successful. 4 key propellers, we would call them, or lessons learned on how to mainstream these further, and then a special cross-cutting one, the role of blended finance ambassadors. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It was like a 200-page document, but let me give you like the 30-second summary of each one of those key elements. So the 3 key enablers. The first one is foundational elements, which is pretty straightforward. That means that those that were successful, the partners within the blended finance structure all shared common objectives, and they were credible players who had a track record working in the markets that they wanted to work in. The second element, of course, is risk mitigation, which is at the heart of blended finance. And there was a number of different examples. It could have been the use of the tripartite structure of capital, a first loss tranche, a mezzanine tranche, a senior tranche. It could be through guarantee instruments. It could be through other innovative mechanisms like the use of insurance or reinsurance, etc. And the third one, we call timeliness, which is sort of a catch-all category that encompassed a number of things, but a key within that was top-down support within institutions. One of the challenges with blended finance is the very long gestation period to develop each fund. Each one was sort of bespoke and took a long time to develop, and so it needed the senior support of the senior managers or officials or leaders of the organizations involved, and also the need to keep them relatively flexible. You can go crazy defining more and more complex structures, and one of the keys is try and keep it as flexible, as simple and as possible. The 4 key propellers or recommendations on how to mainstream this even further going forward. One is the need for standardization, and this is really important work that's being undertaken in a number of fora, including the OECD and more recently the German government and the Hamburg Sustainability Platform. We really need to standardize these so we can replicate them at scale, basically create an assembly line for blended finance. Second, we call understanding, and this is a few components. This is understanding within companies, what is blended finance? Within any given asset owner or manager, you'll have sustainability professionals. They might understand what it is, but most of the key players in the investment classes, whether they're in infrastructure, private equity, fixed income, whatever, a lot of them are unfamiliar with what blended finance is and why they should be interested in it. Same thing for governments. A lot of them who don't know what it is might look at it and go, oh, is this just a way of subsidizing the private sector unfairly? And that's not what it is. So there's this need for a continuous education process to explain what it is that it can do. The third are what we are calling market-wide accelerators. And that the idea is at the core of blended finance is usually some catalytic capital. But that catalytic capital often exists in a number of very small pools spread out in many different places, and they're often very burdensome to access. So one of the key recommendations is to try and consolidate these global pools of catalytic capital, make access to them easier, and that will make it more possible to create more funds going forward. And the last one, I'm not going to get into too much of it, but it's about the regulatory and policy work. And in the study case that we did, we basically referred to the work that was going on the B20, which was submitted to the G20, talking about the need for enabling environments in the recipient countries, and talking about the need at the international level to address some of the prudential regulatory obstacles that inhibit financial players like banks, insurance companies, or pension funds from deploying even more capital, even when they have the appetite to do so. The last key takeaway was the importance of blended finance ambassadors. So people who are familiar with what blended finance is, either within companies, within public sectors, within departments, governments, here at the negotiation table, really sort of to champion it and explain why it's such a powerful tool, but also to be honest and identify the things that it can't do as well. Just to have that open, constant conversation with all the stakeholders. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Eric. And for anyone who is interested in reading the full report, you can find it all over the internet, but on the Investor Leadership Network website. It is a remarkable piece of work, and we're very, very proud of it. So thank you, Eric. This is very easy. Another Eric. Eric Haxthausen from the United States Trade and Development Agency.
Great. Thanks very much, Nick. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all, and very much appreciate the work that ILN has been doing, and also a big thanks to our colleagues at the Treasury Department who brought us into this conversation with ILN and the institutional investor community last year. So at USTDA, U.S. Trade and Development Agency, where I work We are the United States Overseas Project Preparation Agency. We use our finance, the funding that we have, catalytically with a focus on developing projects from the early stage. So project developers will come to us with a good concept, and what we like to do is take that, and at the end of our process, ideally we'll have a bankable project that then can go on and be financed. One of the, it's almost a truism here at COP, and we've been hearing this for a while, and more broadly in the development space, that there's a need to build a pipeline. There's, constantly reports about talking about the need for clean energy projects, the need for climate resilient projects, and that's a role that we play, a bridging role between the project concept and the finance. So that's the role that we're in, and that's why we wanted to partner with ILN, because ILN's members, they have large pools of capital that they're seeking to deploy for high quality projects, high quality clean energy projects, but they're looking for those high quality projects, and we can provide a bit of an early stage pipeline, and then also do some risk mitigation, both through the feasibility studies and technical assistance, FEED studies and pilot projects that we fund, but also just the fact that we're involved, that we're bringing 3 decades of expertise to the table in project preparation, and ensuring that what we're bringing forward is high quality. So that's a role that we can play. That's why we wanted to be in partnership with ILN, and we're really excited to move forward with that. And in our partnership with the ILN, we're aiming to mobilize capital for projects that are ambitious in scale, that involve capable, experienced project sponsors, that have a strong potential for commercial viability, but also strong potential for large-scale development impacts, that have U.S. private sector interest in technology development, and finally, and importantly, have host country support. So those are the type of projects that we're looking to support with the ILN members, and I think I will I'll stop there, but let me say just before I conclude that you have 2 U.S. government parts of the U.S. government here, the Treasury Department and USTDA, but we're also very much in partnership with the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, the Export-Import Bank of the United States, and the U.S. Department of Commerce, so and many others. So I'll stop here and look forward to the discussion, and we can take it forward from there.
Great, thank you, Eric. And this partnership that we have with USTDA, for those of you in the audience who are not super technically familiar with all of this, what USTDA is providing via our partnership is money for technical assistance. That is money that private investors don't have available to do this work, and is very hard to come by, but is not, in the grand scheme of things, a huge amount. And so by using these public funds to prepare projects for investment, make them bankable, this is potentially opening floodgates to many, many, many clean energy projects that can be invested in by ILN members and similar institutions. So we're really, really excited about this partnership, and thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll kind of go down the panel now with a few discussion topics, and we'll start with kind of something a little more macro. And, private capital mobilization writ large is, over the last few years, in a very good way, become a little bit of a buzzword. Everyone's talking about it, and there have been some great examples of things that have happened. There are certainly increases in funding that are happening via blended finance and other mechanisms, but we're not yet seeing the kind of exponential rate of growth in private capital mobilization that we need to see in order to reach the goals that we are trying to reach on time. So the first question to the panel is, how can we take what we have done, and we as in, the broader group of all of us working together, and use those lessons to really try and supercharge systemic change in the coming years, recognizing that we are entering a complicated few years for all of this work?
I'll start us off, given it's a macro question. Just to say, you're absolutely right. Whether you're looking at overall investment in emerging markets or whether you're looking at climate finance in emerging markets, the numbers are not going at the direction that we want to see them going at the scale that we need to see them going, and therefore the focus on how we change that and how we change that across a broad swath of geographies, not to just a few chosen larger markets. I think that engagement and focus and consistency are pieces of this, because as we've learned in talking to investors over the last few years, their ask is not for a new specialized tool. In fact, Eric can speak more to this, but really, maximizing and using the tools that we have, not some complex financial instrument. And I think that we actually are starting to see, as you note, some really good movement. For instance, the World Bank actually, their private capital mobilization went up by 50% year on year last year. It was $66 billion, actually doubled from 2020. I think that we are starting to see the beginnings, the seeds of the direction we need to go. And ILN, we're very pleased to have Secretary Yellen announce this summer a launch of a $400 million fund focused on emerging markets with many investors who had not been in emerging markets before. And I think that learning by doing and maximizing the coordination between the public and private sectors will hopefully see more and more of this. And what we need to do is make sure that we don't continue to shift after different goals or get distracted, but actually continue very much a consistent and focused push, both on the tools that we have to make them faster, more agile, and scale, as well as on investors to make sure that we are working together.
All right. I'm going to answer that with three suggested ways forward to really supercharge the system. Two of them I briefly mentioned in reference to the booklet. So the first is the pools of catalytic capital. We have proof of concept now. We have at least 13 examples, and I know there's more that we've illustrated in the booklet that I referred to. So now, if we want to make that 13 become 30 or 300, we need consolidated pools of catalytic capital that are relatively easy to access by the private sector and can be accessed in a reasonable time frame, right? So it shouldn't take 15 months. It should take 5 months maximum, just to give an example. So that is really one of the key things, and that was at the core of the recommendations that the B20 Task Force on Climate and Infrastructure submitted to the G20 governments. Second one, and I'm not going to speak too much about it because Eric already talked about it, like project preparation really is so key. I remember reading a study commissioned by Daniel Zelikov. He's at JP Morgan, but he used to be the co-chair of the Global Infrastructure Facility at the World Bank, the co-chair of the advisory committee. He estimated that for every $1 the GIF spent, it mobilized between $1 and $200 of private capital. I mean, that kind of ratio is incredible. But unbelievably, the GIF spent maybe something around $18 million in 2022 on, and this is a tiny fraction of the overall World Bank's overall budget. So like that was a market failure. And so the partnership with US TDA, to me, I really hope that puts the GIF to shame and that they really up their game and really dramatically increase the amount of effort they're putting on project preparation. The last one, and this is now looking at what can investors do. I mean, so far I've been telling, as an investor, I've been saying what others can do, so what can we do? And I was thinking about this, and one idea that has become increasingly apparent to me is we need to pool and anonymize our data, especially in emerging markets. So one of the big challenges we have is that the credit ratings for a lot of given projects in emerging markets are not based on historic performance, simply because there's usually a lack of data. They're usually based on perceived risk, some combination of perceived risk, estimated risk, and sovereign risk. And that's a problem because those risks are almost in every case much higher than the actual risks that would be based on actual performance. But very little of that data is in the public domain. So some of us have been pushing for the MDBs to release some of that through the GEMS database. that's a great start. But the private sector itself holds a lot of data. I'm very familiar, and in fact, some of them are members of the ILN, of a lot of asset managers and asset owners who have long 30, 40, 50-year track records of investing in emerging markets. To me, it would be great if we could find a way to take some of that data, anonymize it so that it's not, it's still private, and get like a good academic institution or a research think tank. I'm a Columbia graduate, so I always like Columbia University. It doesn't have to be them. To really do like a rigorous analysis and provide an analytical framework that then, the credit rating agencies and others can use, the Basel Committee, all these prudential regulators, and say, oh, we've been overestimating the risk for a long time. A lot of these projects deserve to be 1 or 2 or 3 notches above. Just that would dramatically increase the universe of potential investors. So that's something that, is homework for us on the investor community to do.
Yeah, that's really appreciate those comments, Eric. That's a really meaty set of sort of things to think about. Just from our side, it feels to us that just deepening the partnerships is really important, and being in greater communication with the financial community, the financiers, is very helpful, because it's kind of making that it's really a form of matchmaking that we're trying to do at some level, and being very aware of what the needs are from financiers can help us do our work better, and I expect it probably goes the other way as well. So that's something that I would highlight. I mean, we're just very focused on going out and finding good projects that we think can attract private finance. So just for example, just over the past year, we committed funding to support the expansion of a wind power generation project in Kenya that's directly tied to the ownership of that wind generating facility, Capeto Wind, by an asset management company called Meridium, which is very much in this space as well. So we see that there's a lot of investor interest in the clean energy space, and for us, it's meeting the moment and continuing to do the work that we do. And I think, as you highlighted also, Eric, just the project preparation work, it's very highly leveraged potentially. So I don't think that we see that there's a surplus of funding going into that space at the moment.
Great, thank you. And that's a good segue into our next question. The whole impetus behind why we're here on this panel, the work that we have all been doing over the last few years together, is a recognition that public-private partnerships are hugely important to figuring out new ways forward by pooling resources and knowledge between the public and private sectors. We really believe that we can find new ways to mobilize capital that each side of the equation wouldn't be able to do on its own. And one of the things that we've really learned is that in many cases, the public sector and the private sector don't even speak the same language about a lot of these things. And so just being able to learn, to level set, to be having the same conversation has been, kind of the table stakes for being able to make progress. So what is the role of public-private partnerships in all of this from your perspectives, and what is the role of leadership in making these kinds of partnerships come together? Because they're not easy to put together, they're not easy to maintain. Each institution has its own incentive structures and 10 other things distracting them.
So I will say that it really does take a willingness to collaborate, and collaboration isn't free. There's a lot of time and effort spent into it. But when we first sat down with members of ILN to bring investors together, Nick is completely right. We realized that we were using the same words to mean completely different things. We really did not have the same language or vocabulary. And the people that we thought should be in the room, investors didn't necessarily think that they should be there. And in fact, I think at the beginning there was a question of whether the MDBs should even be there. And by the end of our first 4 days of deep dive discussion with MDBs in the room, we had identified specific needs. Data came up, securitization, project pipeline, a number of the things that now, looking back about 2 years later, we've made significant progress on. So I think that collaboration is already yielding some steps forward. And we see the same approach in the Private Sector Innovation Lab that Ajay Banga at the World Bank has brought together. See the same in the PG, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investor Forum, where we have gotten recommendations from a host of CEOs on what should happen that would actually mobilize money. And I'd note a few things that have come out of this already. The World Bank's guarantee facility that brings all of the guarantee tools across the MEGA and IFC and the bank, IBRD, with a goal of tripling guarantees. Guarantees were one of the top asks from investors. Securitization with both IDB and IFC launching securitization platforms that offer non-greenfield investments in emerging markets to investors who don't want to take that risk. And finally, on data, just earlier last month, GEMS, the Global Emerging Market Database, actually put out data on all of the MDB investment in emerging markets on their risk-given defaults in a way that is accessible and detailed for investors, an ask that had been on the table at the G20 for many years, probably as many as I've been working in this space, over a decade, and actually was moved over the line by that focus. So I think that we are seeing movements on each of these pieces from working together.
So I agree. There's still a huge need for communication, and I'm going to explain what I mean. So before joining CDPQ in the private sector, I used to be a negotiator for the government of Canada. And so because of that, I can't help myself. So I got here, and I'm like, I'm going to go into the plenary. They're negotiating the NCQG. This is going to be great. It's all about finance. And clearly, there's a lot of misunderstanding because I heard delegation after delegation say, oh, what role does the private sector have? This needs to be all about public financing. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of the intergovernmental negotiations, but I think it quite clearly showed to me the ongoing need for greater dialogue between, not just developing and emerging countries, but between the public, private, and even philanthropic sectors to really explain, yes, there is a key role for the private sector. It doesn't replace the role of public sector. It doesn't replace that. It's complementary to it, and it does a lot of things at scale that the public sector can, and it does, and there's some things that it can't do at all, and that will always, be the case. So I really think that, having been away from the negotiation world for a while and then sort of sticking my head back into it, like that need for dialogue was more clear than it's been for a long time. And so that's what I'm hoping, like things like this, partnership with, the Treasury Department of the United States, with other governments, through the G7 and the G20, investors, we can really have that dialogue, and hopefully increasingly with, the climate negotiators from emerging markets who often don't come from their country's respective ministries of finance, and really often don't speak at all the same language. They speak the language I used to speak before I traded, my government job for a Wall Street job. And it's hard. It's hard. It's a huge learning curve, and it's not. And the same thing for us. Like me, when I talk to my investment colleagues, they don't know what NCQG or CBDR or any of these things mean and why it's important. So there's these big learning curves. So I think, efforts like this, partnerships like this one, to really have that dialogue and maybe, expanding it to include more and more players will be really, really key if whatever it is that they agree to, if it's actually going to be attained in the next 15 years.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really important topic, not only because this is a finance COP, but just this is how we solve this problem that we're all facing as humanity. And if you look at public and private sector, at one level it's just like any partnership, right? You need to find what are the comparative advantages each side. But sort of at a larger level, I think you were alluding to this, Eric. We really can't get to where we need to go just with the scale of public resources alone. It's so apparent, and that's despite all the best efforts in the world from the public sector would not get us to where we need to go. So what does the private sector offer? They offer scale. They offer speed, which is also super important right now. The private sector has great depth of expertise in structuring and implementing projects. They have this depth of finance, just the depth of finance that's represented by the members of ILN, over $10 trillion in assets under management. It's enormous. You don't have that from the public sector, and in the same way. And then the other piece that we see as at USTDA as an agency that was founded to bring the U.S. private sector into the international development space is the technology development and innovation and that comes from the private sector. So just the ability to put those technologies in play. I mean, governments do a lot of things very well, but they don't do they support R&D, and that's really important. And our Department of Energy is here this COP, and you'll hear from them. But the private sector just can do a lot of things. So on the government side, though, there are things that the private sector needs. So they need a really good enabling environment, and the public sector has a great deal of expertise in that. And that's just, agencies like the U.S. Agency for International Development. They're not here right now, but that's their bread and butter, is doing supporting enabling environment improvement, and then catalytic finance, using the resources like what we have at USTDA. Treasuries making investments in the MDBs, which have a catalytic role. So all of that, all these pieces need to come together, and when you do that, that's when you're going to have success.
Great, and I think all three of you hit on one very important point, which is, the private sector is not the only thing that matters here. But as Secretary Kerry is very fond of saying, all the governments in the world don't have enough money to solve the problems that we are confronting. So there is no possible way to get to where we want to go without bringing the private sector in a meaningful way. So it's a really important point. So Lyda, as you mentioned, quite a bit has actually happened over the last few years. We were in a small little conference room in Sharm el-Sheikh and went through a whole list of priorities, and it is pretty amazing that quite a few of those things have happened since. So looking out towards Brazil next year, what do you hope we are saying on this panel next year in Brazil? What do you hope will have happened over the next 12 months?
Number one, I don't want us to be saying the same thing or using the same examples. We need greater success. We need a trend line that is not flat, as we've seen for a number of years, but it is shooting up. And there are a couple of things that I'm particularly focused on. One is on the use of that data. So I mentioned the GEMS database having come out. I'd like to see next year investors able to use that data, and importantly, that data having made an impact on the credit rating agencies' analysis of these markets. And that's really a tool that investors can use. So that is a very top hope. I'd also very much hope that the project preparation that TDA is doing, and you mentioned the GIF and others, has more stories, as Eric has mentioned, like Capetto, so that we actually have investors being able to seize on that pipeline that's coming out and act. Because I think one of the pieces is the market data, but the other piece is the clear data from having your peers already having done it and made money from it. I think that is a key piece. The private sector can't be involved without a profit motive, and the government, public money cannot solve for that gap in profit on a project by project basis. But what it can do is come in and try and close that gap by closing the gap between real and perceived risk. by enabling environments and by producing a pipeline. And I also hope that some of the tools that have been launched, like securitization from both the IDB and the IFC, are actually proving that they can draw in investors at scale, because that is the type of tool that feeds itself. Once you have investors coming in, that frees up capital from MDBs to further invest and bring more projects that they can then be securitized. So I'm hopeful that those are at least two places where we can really see a much greater scale of data.
All right, so for next year in Brazil, I hope I can see three things. So one is, first of all, a successful NCQG, which starts here. Like, that is obviously critically important. And for me, success is, well, there's two levels of success. One is that there's agreement at all. Okay, that's the baseline. But two would be one that actually is both sufficiently ambitious and commensurate with the challenge we have, but also grounded in reality in the world that we live in. And to me, that involves a number of things, but just from my private sector side, some acknowledgement of the importance of private finance. It doesn't have to be, in headlines. It doesn't have to be paragraphs like 1 through 30, but somewhere I feel in there should be that acknowledgement if we want to keep this a reality-based outcome document. So that's one. Two, in Brazil, the NDCs are critically important, and what I would really hope that a big emphasis is put on them is making sure that they're investable. And this is where the project preparation is going to be so important. It's one thing to have great national plans on how you're going to achieve X, Y, and Z and mitigation this and adaptation that. But all of this needs to be done with a view of, like, how can this be invested? How can this be financed? Because if it isn't, if that piece is missing, then it will just be a nice document on a shelf, and in another 5 years we'll do another global stock take, and we'll be disappointed with the results. So really investable NDCs, leveraging the tools that, that USTDA has, that others have, the GIF, to really ensure that the project preparation is done, so that once you have these plans, the checks can be written by investors like us, and we can get shovels in the ground. The last one is, somebody asked me, and it's a good question, what's the equivalent of an NDC for the private sector? And to me, I think the answer to that, I'll refer again to the B20 recommendations that we presented in September. Specifically, recommendation 1.2.4, which my colleague from Bank of America, Karen Fang, deserves a lot of the credit for shepherding through the process. But it was about having banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and other big institutional investors set their own voluntary capital deployment targets towards climate finance in emerging markets. There doesn't have to be dramatic ones, but like the example that we put forward through the B20 was something like 25% of your excess Tier 1 capital. Something like that, to me, could be a huge game changer. And that parallels very nicely the NDC process. So you have countries coming with their own national plans, and then you have the engaged private sector saying, and this is what we're going to commit to on a voluntary basis to show that we mean business too. So those would be my three hopes for next year in Bellum.
Yeah, I agree very much with both Lyda and Eric's comments. It really boils down to having some concrete examples of projects in emerging markets, clean energy projects that show the investment case. And I think once you have those, the money's going to flow, because many investors, ILN members represent pension funds, and ordinary investors, they want to support this agenda, right? We all care about having a habitable planet, and people are energized by it. So it's once you have the investable projects and the track record that shows, hey, it's possible to invest in these projects and they can deliver a satisfactory return for investors, I think the money will start to flow more rapidly.
So I think we have a couple of questions from so one has right up.
Thank you. Finance going at the which it the for what are the ways? To me, the question first going to take law things seems important to be made because security as well as state retire. That sort of brings to scale the but short is going to take a lot. Can solve that private can then through structure what is sure.
Who wants to first?
So I'll give you the practical answer. A lot of us, the multilateral development banks, that should be providing that first loss catalytic capital. The reality is there's a lot of resistance for them to doing it. They're starting to do some of it. I'm not going to say that it's I don't want to be entirely negative, and I want to give credit to where they're doing it. IDBS is doing really wonderful things. I think that's the model that the others should try and emulate. I know you mentioned the World Bank Private Sector Investment Lab consolidating guarantees. But, you know, I think it was Kristalina Georgieva, the IMF at Sharm el-Sheikh, who said, no, they should be giant de-risking institutions on steroids. And they're not, and that process needs to, you know, we need to continue pushing the MDBs, but that's a long, difficult process with a lot of institutional resistance. So in the interim, I think development finance institutions have the nimbleness and the familiarity with the private sector players to fill in that space. So, you know, you mentioned USDFC is a good example, right? FinDev Canada, KFW in Germany, Proparco in France. These institutions can play that role, and it's why, you know, when we were discussing with the Canadian government, we always encourage them, if you have additional climate finance funds available, give it to the DFI as opposed to another multilateral fund where it's going to take us 2 years to access it and it's going to be very slow. Whereas the DFIs can usually act much more quickly and more nimbly.
So I would say a couple of things. I agree. Well, I think that the MDBs are actually ramping up their. We expect a few announcements of some first loss facilities that will come out. However, MDBs are largely never going to be an ideal provider of first loss. It's not fit their mandate or their budget structures, nor is that, I think, the most effective use of their capital on de-risking, which is better spent on enabling environments that can get us to scale. I do, however, would note that, you know, the single largest source of that sort of capital remains the Green Climate Fund. And we are very hard at work, along with other board members and in the G20 to try and make them, as well as other climate funds, more accessible. And by that, I mean faster and easier to use. And then third, I would note that we've seen a number of new players in this space, because first loss basically equals equity. And so we have seen both philanthropies get into this. Once you talk about it as equity, nobody likes the word loss. So, like, that's the number one thing I'd say. We all should start talking about it as equity. It's much more receptive in a conversation. But also a fair amount of investors that we have seen be willing to take more equity risk in markets driven by that impact versus driven by only profit. And so even actors like Altera, it really is looking, you know, at scale but a capped return, are ways of bringing that gap down. And so I sometimes think that the conversation can become very focused on first loss when having public money in that space is always going to be, frankly, a slower, too slow to get to the sort of scale that we need. And we should be looking at tools that can do that more rapid pace and have public money come in a way that can be broader, except on project preparation, where that sort of early de-risking is hard to do in any other way than the public sector.
Any other questions? No one. All right. Well, so we're
That's why we like calling it catalytic capital, not first loss
exactly
capital.
to the point of words matter. So thank you all for joining us. I think we'll go quickly down, kind of one high level, 90 seconds closing thoughts on what we've been talking about today. Lida?
I think that the two biggest keys in this are spending less time looking for silver bullets and focused on concentrated, continued engagement, continuing to push on the same actors and inviting new actors into the space. I think there's a lot of a temptation to spend a lot of time looking for something that will sort of magically get us over the hump. And, hopefully the new technology will come out and help us do some springboarding. But in terms of financial architecture, often what that does is really just gum up the works as we all try to understand new structures. And so I'd say that we on both sides really need to continue that cooperation and discussion so that our vocabularies and tools and understanding can come together for maximum impact.
I would bring it back to one of the points I raised in the first one about the role of all of us being able to be, and it doesn't have to be blended finance, it could be climate finance ambassadors. So you've heard from government, you've heard from the private sector, but all of you from civil society have a role to play too, right? And so it's helping us making those links, helping build those bonds of trust between the public and the private and the philanthropic and civil society to make and to achieve that better understanding and recognizing that all of us have specific roles to play that are different, but that together we could achieve much greater things than if we all work individually. So it's a call to action to all of you.
Yeah, I would just say that, this is a really important problem to be working on, and it's really just about how can we get to scale, how can we kind of reduce any element of friction in the system that allows information to flow, allows us to learn quickly from our experiences. And, if we do this right, we have a real opportunity not only to address the climate challenge, but also to create inclusive economic growth for the developing world as well. So it's not just about the climate agenda, but it's also about the development agenda and the economic growth agenda and inclusivity, and it's about creating opportunity for investors, including pensioners, people who've reached the end of their working life and are reliant on their assets for their continued income. It's an opportunity for them to have a stake in the issue and to receive return on their investments. So there's a real multiple win opportunity here if we can get this right and keep digging into this problem and do more and do it faster.
Great. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our listeners. This has been a fantastic discussion. Enjoy your time.
Thank you for that 5 address force here at 25 last day.
soon. start.
Lost you here. I am Josefina Braña Varela. I'm Vice President of Forests at the World Wildlife Fund, and we are here today to discuss a very important topic, which is the pathways to address one of the most critical challenges that we are facing as humanity today, which is the loss of world's forests. World Wildlife Fund is active in over 100 countries around the world, and we have been working on this challenge for decades. So what I want to do today is provide a brief overview on the scale of this problem and the critical pathways and reverse forest loss, as well as critical ecosystems. So we'll start with that brief overview from my side, and then I'll ask our distinguished speakers to join me here in the panel for discussion. We will have time for a Q&A session towards the end, so please start getting your questions ready, and we'll take them from there. So with that, I want to start by sharing with you that a month ago, on October 10th, WWF launched the Living Planet Report, edition 2024. This is a study of the trends in global biodiversity and the health of our planet, and we publish this report every 2 years. Unfortunately, this year the report indicates a 73% decline in the average size of wildlife populations in just the last 50 years. 73% decline. Just is really alarming. And yes, you see the bright red cover here of the Living Forest Planet report, because the report is designed to sound the alarm that the dual and interlinked climate crises of climate change and biodiversity loss are pushing the planet closer to dangerous and irreversible tipping points. And with the report, we want to underscore the urgency of the world meeting the global goals on nature, climate change, and sustainable development by 2030. And the reality is that the report and the science and many of us working in forests know that we cannot reverse nature loss and biodiversity loss, address climate change, and develop sustainable livelihoods without forests. Forests are a key piece of the puzzle that is going to be a huge part of the solution. Nonetheless, forests are in trouble. And if we look at the 2024 Forest Declaration Assessment Report, we can see that around 6.4 million hectares of forests were permanently lost only in 2023. This implies a deforestation rate 45% higher than what we need to stay on track to our goals for 2030. In addition, forest degradation affected 62.6 million hectares around the world in 2022. And you all know, and we are seeing more and more closer to home, that the forest fires are growing in frequency and intensity everywhere in the country. So climate change is also making our ecosystems vulnerable. Let's bring the attention to real places like the Amazon basin. I want to talk about, I want you to imagine the vast Amazon rainforest and flag that it's nearing a dangerous tipping point that is not only affecting the local people and the communities that depend on the rainforest for their sustenance, but it's actually going to affect our planet's climate forever because of the release of the carbon tons into the atmosphere and because it will disrupt the weather patterns around the world, the globe, as you can see here. And if business as usual continues and we don't take the right measures at scale and the speed that we need to, other places like the Congo Basin's pristine forests could face similar threats in the very near term. So protecting standing forests and halting deforestation and restoring forests are really vital for us to tackle the climate change crisis and for us to secure a nature-positive future. Now, of course, the scale of the challenge we face will demand us to focus on systems transformation, right? Like not piecemeal approaches. We really need to talk about how we are going to transform the systems that sustain our economy. And I'm talking about transformations on how we manage and conserve nature and forests, but also transformations in our food and financial systems. WWF, with Climate Focus and other partners, have been working on a 2030 vision, global forest vision for forests, to bring attention to the different pathways that we need to be exploring. Some of these pathways are shown here in the screen, but I wanted to bring attention to a couple of urgent needs that are important. And this other system as well as for the areas. In the focusing which not focus here for WWF and that I wanted to share with you is WWF efforts to advance project finance for permanence of PFP approaches that we are advancing under the banner of Enduring Earth with other partners. And this approach will aim to secure sustained funding for conservation efforts at scale by linking financial investments to measurable goals that will deliver both social and environmental benefits. So this takes the form of a transition fund of several $million that are secure to make sure that the system of protected areas of a given country is going to be sustainable and is going to be effective. With this, and for us supporting leaders around the world, it's to really protect over 500 million hectares of lands, oceans, and fresh water by 2030. That is our main goal. And by safeguarding these critical ecosystems, we hope that we can help nations and different stakeholders to really achieve durable conservation, but also to boost community prosperity and contribute to the global efforts such as 30 by 30 target coming out from the other COP in Cali, important to highlight, and also to keep achieving our sustainable development goals. Okay. So looking ahead, we see opportunities for partnership with country and community leaders. And I want to talk about an example which I personally feel very proud of, and is our work with the government of Brazil, where WWF is supporting the government of Brazil with other partners to shape a new PFP in the Amazon called ARPA Communities, as you can see in the screen. that will secure additional protected areas. So ARPA Communities builds on a first effort that has achieved recently the 20-year anniversary of protecting areas in Brazil effectively. We want to expand that effort and build from that, and we are focusing now on ARPA Communities where we are going to secure additional protected areas, but also long-term financing for bioeconomy and sustainable livelihoods of the communities. Okay, so we won't have the time to go further in detail, but if you want to know more about ARPA Communities, please approach me later. To end my remarks, I just want to highlight that it's not only important to obviously protect what we still have standing. That would be irrelevant if we don't actually tackle the causes of deforestation loss and degradation. And I'm referring to unsustainable agriculture. Because roughly 50% of agricultural land conversion emissions are caused by only three commodities: beef, soy, and palm oil. These are the three commodities that are causing deforestation. 50% of these emissions coming from the agricultural sector. Of course, there's other commodities that we need to pay attention and that are contributing to emissions, like timber, pulp and paper, rubber, coffee, cocoa, because they also are driving deforestation and ecosystem loss. But want to finish my remarks with good news, and the good news is that businesses are increasingly adopting zero deforestation goals for the supply chains, and businesses are starting to work more closely also with governance. So it's good to start seeing these partnerships where public and private sector are taking action in partnership with other stakeholders such as Dollar Left to really tackle this wicked problem that is deforestation and degradation. In the United States Congress, one of the leading voices for global forest and legality, sustainability, and traceability of global agricultural supply chains is Senator Brian Schatz from the state of Hawaii. Senator Schatz couldn't be here with us today, but he has sent us a recorded message. So let's hear from him. And I think I need your help.
Hello, everybody. It's so great to join you all virtually at this year's COP, and I want to thank WWF for hosting this important discussion about global deforestation. As you know, deforestation accounts for roughly 10% of global emissions, and the rapid loss of forests around the world as a result of it is staggering. In just 2 years, we lost tropical primary forests at a rate equivalent of 10 soccer fields per minute. And so as we continue to fight the climate crisis on all fronts, it is essential that we address this issue with urgency. In the U.S. Senate, I lead the Bipartisan Forest Act, which takes common sense steps to prohibit certain products linked to illegal deforestation from being imported into the United States. That includes making global supply chains more transparent and helping countries to monitor and police illegal deforestation. These steps are good for the planet, but they also help to increase the competitiveness of companies who are sourcing responsibly. The good news is that there's strong bipartisan support for international conservation efforts and addressing deforestation. And now's the time to turn that support into action. We are already starting to see some encouraging progress, including a significant reduction in deforestation in the Amazon. But that's in part due to the goals that have been set as part of past COPs. There's still a lot more work to do, and I'm confident that together we can tackle this problem. I'm committed to working with all of you to make it happen. Thanks very much.
Good. So we deeply appreciate the Senator's leadership and durable. Panel for special Kevin and panel. us. It's already so I us. To as a practice for for people and the deforestation. So, to us from you and is the where the United continue.
First of all, thanks to WWF for organizing this event on an important topic. Some of you know that I'm a member of the Alumni Association of WWF, so it's a special pleasure to be here. Look, for us, reducing emissions from deforestation is one of our top 3 climate priorities. Obviously, it's got to be the energy transition to reduce emissions from fossil fuels. Got to bring in the non-CO2 gases like methane to reduce those. But reducing emissions from deforestation is on the top 3 list. And in fact, not only do we have the tools to deal with it now, but it also delivers so many additional co-benefits for nature and sustainable development. It's really a no-brainer. And so for that reason, the U.S. Accepted co-chairmanship of the Forest Climate Leaders Partnership during its first 2 years of existence. And that is a grouping of high-ambition countries from both the Global North and Global South to work together to implement the goal of the Glasgow Declaration, now incorporated into the global stocktake, to halt and reverse forest loss and degradation by 2030. And some of you may have attended an event yesterday, a leaders-level event, at which the U.S. and Ghana turned over leadership of that partnership to the U.K. and Guyana. And the theme of many of the speakers at that event was how, a pledge is not self-implementing, but it's inspiring, and it's led to a lot of action where we have seen progress. So I'm going to highlight 4 areas that we're working on that map pretty well into WWF's vision, and just to give a sense of what we're up to. So the first, and close to my own heart and where I met Josefina initially, is in the Red Plus space. And we are certainly doing what we can to mobilize both results-based finance and activate high-integrity carbon markets as a way of delivering finance to forest countries that are producing high-integrity emissions reductions from forests. And so we were advocating for the recent decision of the Green Climate Funds Board to reactivate results-based finance and Red Plus and mainstream it into its programming. We've been active members of the governance and financing of the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility at the World Bank and the Initiative for Sustainable Forest Landscapes, and we're the first contributor to the new Scale Umbrella Trust Fund to support countries to move from results-based finance into markets. You may have heard of the LEAF Coalition, which is a public-private initiative joining several governments with more than 24 companies to develop sort of a buyer's club for high-integrity jurisdictional scale credits. And we've already started to see deal flow with the first 2 payment agreements concluded last year at the COP, another one with the state of Pará in Brazil during New York Climate Week in September, and more in the pipeline. So that's an exciting progress to report. You've mentioned commodity supply chains and the need to get deforestation out of those. I'm sure we'll hear more from Kevin about that topic. We're involved in a number of partnerships to try to advance that agenda, both on the global level, for example, a forest data partnership with FAO and with some other NGOs and private sector companies to provide the data protocols and data to underpin efforts to identify forest risk issues. And also in specific places, for example, we're supporting the Nature Conservancy to help realize the ambitious goal of the government of the state of Pará to have 100% cattle traceability by 2026. In addition, we're active in trying to mobilize private investment for the restoration agenda, which is an important complement to the forest protection agenda. And the Development Finance Corporation of the United States put in a $50 million investment to help leverage $1 billion for restoration in the Cerrado in Brazil. And we see that as the first step in a much broader and scalable approach. finally, we are active on the steering committee of the Tropical Forest Forever Fund, launched a year ago, and helping to design a new mechanism for rewarding standing forests, which, as you pointed out, Josefina, has been one of the gaps in our landscape of forest finance, and so we're working to close that as well. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Frances. You've been busy. Kevin, I just want to acknowledge that Mars has been taking significant steps and commitments to address responsible sourcing and to address your supply chain and the impact of your supply chain. And this is not new, but I do want to ask you, what is the biggest challenge and opportunity that you are facing or that you have faced in your journey of sustainability? But also, given that you are not like a newbie, you've been in this space for a while, I want to understand what would you say to other companies that are pondering their deforestation-free journey?
Yeah, thanks WWF to the invite, and while I'm not a newbie, Frances is the veteran of the space. Literally wrote the book on tackling deforestation. There is a book, so I just wanted to call out what a pleasure it is to
meet my agent.
Yeah, exactly. I don't get a commission, and been working with Frances and WWF for more than a decade on this. So I think the biggest challenge for corporates working on deforestation is, if we wind the clock back a little bit. So Mars, big food business. Most food businesses buy what we would describe as commodities. And when we describe it as a commodity, what that really means to us is everything we care about can be measured in the bucket of whatever that shows up at the factory, right? So we specify fat, protein, moisture, color, flavor, viscosity, all these attributes. And anything that meets those attributes in the bucket is a commodity and interchangeable with any other bucket of that same stuff that shows up at the factory. So those are all product attributes. Great, because that works for us, because at the end of the day, that's what makes the products taste delicious and have the right shelf life and all those features. The challenge when we think about sustainability, certainly deforestation, but really everything that you think about in sustainability, greenhouse gas emissions more generally, water use, human rights issues, income issues, none of those things can be measured in the bucket. Right? They're not product attributes, they're process attributes, right? They're not about what's in the bucket, they're about the system and the process and the places that produced whatever's in the bucket. Great, clever thought. The problem that creates is we have procurement and purchasing and sourcing systems built around every bucket is interchangeable. But as soon as you care about those processes, every bucket is interchangeable, which means you can't just change the specification. You actually have to change the way you think about doing your procurement. And one of the ways that we talk about this is to tackle really any sustainability challenge, and for sure it's true for deforestation, is we either have to change what we're buying, where we're buying it, who we're buying it from, or how we're buying it. And just adding a line to a specification saying, and now deforestation free, isn't going to get the change done. And so that the biggest challenge really is the idea that this isn't a simple change of like just ask for something different from your suppliers. We actually need to really drive change. We need to rethink the way we run our commercial relationships, right? And often that means moving away from short-term spot market sourcing where every year you put it back out for bid and new people can show up with a new bucket full of whatever, and getting more into long-term contracts, because when we care about the process, it becomes harder to switch, because if we want to switch to a new supplier, we've got to ask all the questions about the process again. And if the process isn't right, we've got to work on changing the process. And so that leads you down the logic of like, okay, so I need to think more about long-term contracts. And now suddenly you're not having a sustainability conversation. You're having a procurement strategy conversation. So I think that's the big challenge. I think the guidance I would give to other companies that are thinking about this is the bad news is if you're just getting into this and thinking about this now, where have you been? The good news is a lot of companies, Mars and others, have thought a lot about this, and so you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of ideas about how to do this, but you can't lose sight of the fact that this isn't sort of a minor change to solve for your sourcing. It's a major one. And then maybe the last thing I'll say is, the original theory of change on deforestation was, if I buy, so let's say Frances is a 1 million ton supplier of whatever, palm oil, and I buy 50,000 tons from her. So I say to her, hey, I want 50,000 tons of deforestation-free palm oil. And that's the end of the conversation, right? She'll go find 50,000 tons, sell them to me. The opportunity is for me to say, actually, I care about the whole 1 million tons that you sell to everybody. I still only buy 50, but I care about the 1 million. I'm going to judge you as a supplier. And, if Josefina sells 1 million tons and has her whole business deforestation-free, I'm going to do business with her. And at the margin, maybe Francis goes, it's 5% of my business. I'll take the chance. I'll call his bluff, right? But if 5 other people in the audience who buy 50,000 tons from her ask for the exact same thing, I buy 50,000 tons, but I care about the whole 1 million, suddenly it's a bigger and bigger part of her business. And that really drives a collective action, looking at suppliers on the entirety of their business, not just on the piece they sell to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. We'll talk about collective action, hopefully in a moment as well. But before that, I want to ask Claudio, thanks for being here with us today. Brazil has been a country that has been showing that we can tackle deforestation. And Brazil has been actually experiencing dramatic declines in the deforestation rates. I think many people would like to know what are the key elements, why is this happening? What are the key elements that are driving this decline? And what is the role of the observatory that you play in Brazil along with other local actors to sustain these results, right? Because we also know that deforestation is not one-off and you are done. Like deforestation is a permanent job to tackle that. So what can you tell us about your role?
Well, amazing as it may seem, government sometimes works. and that's what's happening now in Brazil. Government is doing its job. In Brazil, Francis and you all are certainly familiar with this, but I'm not sure if the whole audience knows about it. There was a string of policy tools that were developed since the 1990s, and they were put into place as a package for the first time in the early 2000s as the Amazon Deforestation Prevention and Control Plan. And that was, I think it's fair to say, that string of public policies was the key driver of the reduction in deforestation that we saw in Brazil from 2005 to 2012. We cut down deforestation rates by 83% at that time. So it was huge. And quite frankly, I before becoming an activist, I was a journalist for quite a while, covering those issues. And when I started as a journalist, no one thought that deforestation could be actually defeated in Brazil. And we didn't defeat deforestation, of course, but we proved the principle. It is possible to drive down deforestation, and it's even possible to drive it down to zero. That's the goal right now, hot and reverse. The president, Lula, in his third term, when he was elected 2 years ago, promised that he would halt all deforestation in Brazil by 2030. And organizations like the network I work for are just trying to hold the president accountable for his own promise. And we saw awful times with the forest in Brazil in the last decade or so. It eventually, most of the gains we had in the beginning of the century were lost to irresponsible policies that signaled to the people doing action on the ground, mostly criminals, because most of the deforestation in the Amazon is the result of criminal activity. And when politics reversed in Brazil, the signal was, it's okay. You can do whatever you like. Just go and burn it all down. And another thing very important to understand about deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon is that the policy signals are often as important as or more important than the actual policy. So when you tell people, since it's all speculation, that you're free to speculate, that's what they do. And that's how deforestation went up again. And now, in his third term in office, President Lula is deploying the same set of policies again. And that's how his government managed to get deforestation down by 47% in just 2 years. And we're hoping, of course, it's a permanent gig. It's not good enough to take it down a couple of years and then let it rise again. That's why tools like TFFF and mechanisms such as RED Plus and the involvement of the private sector with the soy moratorium and the cattle agreements we had in Brazil in 2009, those are all very important instruments to keep it down. So the government comes in at the first moment and drives it down, but then the economy has to kick in and keep it down. And from our perspective, what we do is Brazil has a very science-oriented civil society. There are historical reasons for that. I could go into that, but I will bore you to death, so I won't. And we actually measure Brazilian emissions. We measure deforestations. We have satellite tools, and my network, the network I work for, measures emissions every year. And that's one lever for us to go to the government every year and say, hey, emissions are going up. And since deforestation is the key driver of emissions in Brazil, we basically shame the government. As a famous Brazilian playwright said once, governments are like drum kits. You need to bang them from time to time so that they can work properly, and that's what we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it's fascinating to hear from your different perspectives and from where you, each of you are sitting on the different role that you can play. And also it's interesting to listen to the challenges, especially Kevin. I think one thing in my role in WLF, sometimes I find myself trying to play translation between public and private sector, and I realize that they don't speak the same language, and I think that's part of the problem. So how to kind of like play that translation role and understand like the nature and motivations of a private sector company versus the objectives and motivations of a public sector entity is not the same. You come from different places. But I think the key is to work together across sectors and across borders. And I wanted to ask you for this second round before we open for the public, how do we need to, what needs to happen and how do we grow these partnerships across sectors to amplify our impact? I mean, we're running out of time. 2030 is around the corner. I appreciate that everybody is doing what they can in their corners, but I feel like we should be clever and thinking how we can multiply, catalyze, and double, triple our impact by working together. So this is a question for all of you.
Maybe I'll start. So maybe to answer, I'll pick up on two things that Claudio talked about. So yeah, Brazil is an incredible case study for how policy actually matters, helpfully, then unhelpfully, and now helpfully again. So, you know, it's like, it's an unfortunate but very clean experiment of sort of signal response. And one of the great things is, so back to what I was describing of like, if I'm gonna pivot to evaluating Frances on her full 1 million tons, you know, if Claudio is her government, he of course is going to evaluate her on the full 1 million tons, right? He's going to regulate her whole business, not just little corners of her business. And so in that sense, as the private sector, as a customer, when we start to think that way, our thinking comes much more into alignment with the way governments are thinking about things. And interestingly enough, financial institutions. Because the bank that's loaning Frances money to run her business is also looking at her entire 1 million tons, not just the little bit that she sells to us. And so I think it's an important opportunity for us as buyers to add into our thinking that whole supplier mindset, which lines us up with financial institutions and government incentives. The other thing Claudio said, which is 100% applicable to the private sector, is driving accountability for performance, right? So of course, we've got deforestation commitments by commodity, but arguably more importantly, we're doing greenhouse gas accounting on deforestation in our supply chain, which is part of our GHG footprint, which is part of our public commitments, which is part of our senior leader compensation. So it all sort of ties in. And so, you've got senior leaders, myself included, and up to the CEO, who are thinking, my bonus, in part, is contingent on delivering the greenhouse gas reductions in our targets. And if we let our deforestation work get off track, we're going to miss that GHG performance. And so, along with all the other reasons we should be caring about it, it makes it a very personal incentive. And so I think that's an important part of the alignment. And I think maybe the last thing I'll say is there are, of course, many reasons to be concerned about deforestation, right? Carbon emissions, biodiversity, water cycle disruption. You only need to care about one of them to motivate the behavior change. Right? So in our case, getting into our GHG accounting is the thing that will drive the action. And if that drives us to revamp all our supply chains, all the other benefits sort of come along for free on that ride. And so I think thinking through what's the thing to measure, what's the theory of change to drive the action, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to measure everything. And just because you don't measure doesn't mean you don't care about it. You sort of, in the back of your mind, that's on the bus. Right? It's somewhere in the back of the bus, but it's on the bus, so it doesn't matter. So I think simplifying and really thinking through that sort of theory of change is really critical.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you.
So clearly, partnership's critical for this whole agenda, and there are certain things that only governments can do, right? And that's why we're a proponent of jurisdictional scale RED Plus, because the key issues related to deforestation, enforcing the law, are things that only governments can do. But there are things that the private sector can do. When government, budgets are constrained, the financing of a lot of the things that need to happen can come from the private sector. Civil society has a lot of technical expertise and the ability to be advocates. So we need to combine cleverly those different elements. And so when I, look through the list of things I talked about in my previous intervention, we're trying to combine these different elements. So, for example, even though the Forest Climate Leaders Partnership is an intergovernmental partnership, one of its initiatives is an Indigenous peoples platform to create a forum for dialogue between Indigenous peoples and governments. And I think it's not just an issue of communication across sectors, it's also an issue of building trust. So having those spaces to build trust to be able to work together going forward. Same with private sector. I mean, one of the features of the LEAF Coalition is bringing together the public sector, sovereigns to be able to, offer essentially a floor price for credits, and then provide a sort of endorsement that helps crowd in the private sector demand for carbon credits. I forgot to say this before, but actually a week from Thursday, there's going to be an event right here on the LEAF Coalition. So those who are interested in learning more about that should definitely attend. And I guess the additional points that I would make, in addition to having different roles in the ecosystem and being able to complement each other by working together, partnerships are a tool for resilience. So that if any piece of that ecosystem, has its ups and downs, you've got this whole other, set of partners that can continue the agenda in different thematic and geographic areas, so that if you go through a bad patch, in some area, you've got a resilient network of partnerships that can move the agenda forward.
Thank you, Frances. Very relevant. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I don't think I have a lot to say, but I think 3 words: regulation, regulation, regulation. In countries like mine, the private sector up to this day lives with a lot of inefficiency in its production chains. And if it's not properly regulated, it will keep on, living externalities such as deforestation and ensuing carbon emissions to the whole of society, while internalizing the profits in a very inefficient way. I'll just give you one example of a very simple policy tool that has been deployed in Brazil. 11, 12 years ago, the government came up with an idea to the beef sector. what if you restore your pastures? You just apply fertilizer, build some fences, and we'll give you some, low interest loans for you to do that. And they said, yeah, okay, good idea. Yeah, we'll do it. And they did it. As a result, we are right now removing massive carbon emissions from formerly degraded pasture lands. Cattle ranchers are making more money, raising more heads of cattle per hectare, and reducing pressure on native ecosystems. So that's the kind of thing. And the other thing was the soy moratorium. Zero deforestation in the soybean chains in the Brazilian Amazon. Oh, no, that will never work. And buyers said, we're not buying if you're not doing it. So they did it. What happened? Soybeans production grew massively in Brazil. So that's the kind of thing. You either have a regulation or some, even private sector customers telling you what to do. And in the end, you moan, but you end up doing it, and it works.
Thank you, Claudio. So I hear you, and I think very clear from your messaging, regulation, command and control, there's no substitute for that. We need to make sure that we address and continue to grow in the forest governance space for sure. You also talk about visibilizing the problem, right? Like when you are monitoring the deforestation in Brazil and you are making it evident, it's difficult to ignore. And Kevin, I hear you saying it's important to understand the motivation from the given stakeholder, in your case from corporate partners. What is the motivation of the company to understand? Maybe it's meeting your GHG target, and that is the entry point, but that doesn't exclude that you can take action in a broader space. It's just finding the right motivation. And also you talk about incentives, like incentives for senior people to meet goals of the organization. So that was very clear. And Frances, you talk about the importance of building trust among stakeholders, which I think is key to create that resilience pathway. So whenever one of the ingredients fails, other ingredients are there to make sure that we are sustaining the fight. So thank you for that. I want to make sure that we have at least a chance for one question from the audience, if somebody wants to ask a question before we wrap up. Anna. Amy? Yes? Go for it.
Can you hear me? Yeah, great. I'm Amy Duchel from FAO, and I stumbled into this event. Very glad I did, thanks to my friend Franklin. I didn't know it was happening, so I'm really happy to be here. I think a quick comment and a question. The comment, I really like this idea of focusing on your role, our role, because I think this problem is so overwhelming that it's hard to sometimes know how to really address it because it's so big. And actually at FAO, for the very first time in our history, we have a joint item on agriculture and forestry. It took 80 years to get there, but we're there. And so it means that the agricultural side of the house actually now we have a mandate to work with the forestry side of the house together in something joint. And so I think that's sort of the place where I see myself is in that particular spot. Just on a very practical question for those of you who are involved in the development of the TFFF, it's a super innovative idea and simple idea, and actually the right idea because it's about the whole benefits, all the benefits that forests provide. I'm just wondering on a practical level how a payment system like that would interact with jurisdictional REDD+ in a place that's, let's say, really successful at reducing deforestation.
Do you want to try to tackle that? We still don't know.
Right. Josefina's right. The design of the TFFF across the capitalization model, the governance model, and the reward for performance model are all very much under construction and being debated about what the best way forward would be. I think one of the propositions that the Brazilians have made clear in presenting the idea is that it's meant to be a complement to REDD+ finance rather than a substitute. Because, REDD+ is focused on rewarding changes in the flux of carbon, from the forest, whereas the TFFF is more focused on rewarding area of forest. So it's not a carbon only, but more the broad suite of services that forests provide. So it's really more focused on protecting those standing forests, I mean, the so-called HFLD, areas in the near term that have not been well served by REDD+ finance up to now, but also providing that long-term security. I mean, if we were successful with REDD+ and all countries, successfully reduced their deforestation and say became, high forest, low deforest jurisdictions, where is the finance going to come from in the long term? So we sort of need a TFFF to really fill in that longer term role. So I think one of the benefits of having been investing in the infrastructure for REDD+ over the last 15 years is that there are a lot of institutions, whether it's forest monitoring capacity in countries and globally, or whether it's benefit sharing institutions in the context of REDD+ finance, can be repurposed for the TFFF. But it doesn't mean that they're substituting for each other. It's just using those capacities and institutions to serve both goals.
Yeah, thanks, Frances. I was going to highlight that as well. I mean, one is the complementarity. The second is that we have come a long way. I don't think TF cube, as you like to call it, Frances, is not going to try to reinvent the wheel, but actually build, hopefully, from all the learnings that we had in terms of like forest definitions and methods and how we create the rules. So hopefully it's going to be a lighter lift in that sense. Also kind of like the complement, like if you are very successful in reducing emissions, as I said, like it's not like it's one-off effort and then you forget about forest forever. Like, no, you actually have to make the hard work and provide the right incentives until we really shift to really value standing forest. We will need to have that incentive in the medium to long term. And I think it's the government of Brazil leading, but the idea has been getting a lot of traction, and we are excited to support the effort and see where this is going to take us on. I want to thank you, all of you, Claudio, Kevin, Frances, for joining us today. We are a little bit wrapping up, and thank you, all of you, for being with us and for also you joining online, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
This was the last event of the day at the U.S. Center. We know parting is such sweet sorrow. But don't worry, we'll be back again tomorrow.